do my very best not to trip and fall over this thing that is behind me here. So if you suddenly see me fall to the ground, please help. I'm falling and I cannot get out.
She's a fall.
That's right. If I fall down, I am not getting back up. Friday, it's over. Done. I've done it all. That's right.
It may not be
That's right.
working.
Somebody take it from here.
I don't know.
Okay, so this morning we're going to talk about normal motor development of children. We're going to look at a bunch of theories of how we, from infants to adults, progress. Some of the theories looking at psychological or psychosocial concepts, other directly motor concepts, but we'll look at a variety of theories of how this happens, because of course really nobody knows exactly how we do this. And it is kind of amazing that we all turn out relatively the same. Kind of magical. Kind of interesting. So we'll look at those theories, and then we'll look at some specific milestones for gross motor, fine motor, development of kids up to a certain level of age, and then we'll eventually wrap it up there. Okay? So, like I said, there's several theories. Several theories of human development. We're going to look at all of these: lifespan approach, the developmental time periods concept, sensitive periods, dynamic systems theory. I talked about that a little bit when we were talking about motor control. We were looking at the incorporation of motor system, sensory system, CNS, cardiopulmonary, all of that all put together. We'll look at some psychosocial theories. I'm sure all of you have heard of these gentlemen that I'll be talking about before. And then we'll look at some developmental concepts. So, to start with, the lifespan approach. This is just a real broad, overarching concept. We are progressing. We develop and we continue to develop throughout our entire lifespan. There's always something that we're moving forward with. Some of us take steps back, but most of the time we're working forward. That motor development is multidimensional, that it isn't just a straightforward progression. It's not muscles get stronger, keep getting stronger. There's forwards and backwards. There's development of some areas, regression in other areas, and then progression there, and another area is kind of quiet for a period of time. That motor development is plastic and flexible. Meaning, I know that Brenda has talked about this in the neuro class as well, the plasticity of our central nervous system. So that impacts our motor system. So that flexibility to make changes. In addition, motor development is contextual. What do you think I mean by that?
Your experiences in life?
Yeah, absolutely. What context did you grow up in? Let's do a little concept map for a second. When we have, if you had a new baby right now, one of the things that your baby would experience is sitting in a car seat, laying on the floor on a blanket. Let's regress 150 years, and let's talk about swaddling or papoosing an infant that had to be bound up tightly for long periods of time while a nomadic group of people moved from point A to point B. And how did you take those kids? You swaddled them up tight, shoved them on your shoulder, and took off. Did they get lots of time to kick their legs around? Probably not during those time frames. So regardless of their age, and they didn't have that laying on the floor blanket, kicking their legs around opportunity. And yet, they all figured out how to walk, and they all figured out how to run, and so they all got to the same place that everybody else was. So context of your culture, your location, the time frame, and the continuum, all of that has impact as to what the flow of your development is. And then again, culturally also embedded in history. What does your family do? What has your culture done for long periods of time? How does that impact your motor development? So let's look at the concept of developmental time periods. And so let's break that up into 4 different categories: infancy, childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. We consider infancy birth to 2 years. There are toddlers in there, but for this particular theory, we're looking at birth to 2 years. This is a critical time, critical age, where infants develop a sense of trust around their caregivers. It's also, if anyone can recall, a 2-year-old. This is when they're learning how to be autonomous. I do it! Come on, eat your breakfast. No! Their favorite word, no. By 3, it's why. But at 2, it's no. They're starting to integrate or use sensory input to kind of develop their movement patterns. So on Wednesday I talked about that AT&R reflex. You turn your head, the hand goes out this way. And it allows that early hand regard. What is that thing over there? It takes a while for that to be meaningful to a child that, oh, that's part of me. I keep wondering why he slaps me in the back of the head every time I turn my head. I don't know what that is. But this is that time frame of starting to put together body parts and understanding what part is you and who you are and how you explore your world. Everything goes in your mouth, which is one of the highest sensory places in your body when you're little. That's why everything goes in the mouth. Your lips and tongue can maneuver it around, and it's more logical that way than with your hands. Your hands don't work so good yet. Mouth works great. So all of this sensory input, talking about how do we move, how do we progress forward in our normal motor development. And as that progression continues, then we start to get into our environment. We start to be interested by a movement, by a color, by somebody going by. That creates that moment of curiosity and initiates the I want to go see what that was, which is when you see babies roll over, push up on their elbows to look around in their environment, start to creep, ultimately to get up and walk because I want that thing over there and I can't get to it. And that's the motivator. This area, this time, and we'll talk about this as a psychosocial theory, this is the sensory motor section of life. Sensory stimulating motor activity. Childhood. So now we're talking about 2 years old to puberty. So for girls that's about 10, for guys it's about 12. This age group is initially identified as pre-operational. This is a Piaget psychosocial theory. That means that they don't think in a logical way. They can't analyze. They're very solid in what they think. They're learning about themselves. Everything is in a physical, has to be completely present in front of them for them to really be able to even think about it. There's none of that sense of, when they're really young, if you're talking about a theory or a imaginary kind of concept, if you can't show it to them in a picture or tangible, they really have no idea what you're talking about. It's difficult when they're learning about time, the passing of time. They're learning about what does it mean a week from now, and what does that mean? Those are really difficult concepts for these guys. By the time they're getting up past about 6, 7 years old, then they're able to think more logically. But they still are thinking logically about things that are tangible. They're not creating logical thoughts about psychological theories or anything like that. They really need to have the physical, tangible items in front of them for them to really be able to have more logical concepts. At this age, especially in the 2 to 7 year old range, they think that their point of view is the only possible point of view. They don't have the ability to consider that if you're standing looking at this table this way, and they're standing and looking at this table this way, they will assure you this is a wide table. They cannot, unless they go here, to appreciate that it's a narrow table. Does that make sense? As long as they're here, it's a wide table. They can't make that shift. They have to progress out of that really pre-operation time to understand that. Everything is about them. It is so very egocentric. Everything should happen because they want it to happen. Things that do happen that are good are because they wanted it to happen, and things that are bad are sometimes because they were bad and they created it. So, very egocentric at that age. And gradually moving forward with a better or more robust sense of who they are as time goes by. As we get up into adolescence, we're talking about age 10 to 12, boys and girls, up to about 18, 19, 20, somewhere in there. And right about there, we move into adulthood. So in this adolescence time, they're really trying to figure out who they are. And so, again, we're back to autonomy to some degree. This is, I want to be able to do what I want to be able to do. If I decide I'm going to go do something, who's going to stop me? That kind of approach. But it's about figuring out who they are as a person. They are definitely into the area of formal operations in that they can create logical thoughts, they can understand concepts without having to see the concept. They can work through, trying to think of a good example of this. Prior to adolescence, you asked a child to describe what does it mean to be honest. And the child will say, I tell the truth. That's being honest. When we move into this stage, if you asked, what is honesty? You're going to get a robust answer. Honesty is having everybody be able to say what is true, understanding that not everybody understands the same truth. That's the difference between these two. Sort of solid, more broad. Able to understand from other people's point of view that things can be different. This is where you get into, this is the age where you can really engage in debate. What do you think about gun control versus allowing everybody to do whatever they want? How does that work in the world? Because they can now conceptualize the world. for our country and how everybody has diverse opinions. So it takes until here for that to really come forward. They're getting out of the egocentricity in that it's not just about them. They can reach out to other people. They can understand from other people's point of views.
It's when all you think that the kids should all become lawyers.
Yes, yes, oh my gosh, because they have an answer for absolutely everything. Because they're practicing there, they're practicing that. They have an argument, they have an opinion, they can debate with you for hours and hours about why they should be able to do what they want to do and how possibly nothing bad could possibly happen because I've already planned all of this out. Come on, you guys have all done this.
And they always have to have the last word.
Oh, really?
Oh, gosh, yes.
You think? Have you noticed this on, okay, so perhaps those of you who are of a certain age, you may not appreciate my humor with this. I have a daughter who's now 18. Every text, she has to have the last, okay,
Word.
thanks, smiley face. Wait, it does, okay, bye, bye. Okay, it's over, stop. Okay. That's this age. That's this age. And then we move into adulthood. So biologically, we're talking about 20 years old. We will not even talk about maturation or, There's some developmental sways in here. This is taking on responsibility of your actions. This is typically time frames where you're moving away from what has been a stable or not stable home, but you're striking out on your own time. You're having to take care of yourself. You're making broad and substantial decisions. And there's a time in there that if there's some flux, it's difficult. It's difficult. And so people kind of go through this in waves, this time frame. Some remain, fairly young. I will say that when you see the person who finishes high school, immediately goes into university, that often is a slight delay in that development. Now, learning is substantial, but world experience, not the same curve up as somebody who finishes school and goes right out into the world. Do you see what I'm saying? So there's curves in here. And of course, not everybody follows every path. We consider middle adulthood around 40s. And we consider older adulthood around 60s here in middle adulthood. And then we'll talk later in this quarter about what does it mean to be young, old, or old, because there's categories of how old is. Lots of categories. So here's a way of conceptualizing some of these periods and phases and when this all happens. So if you'll look at this, we'll consider this birth, and here's weeks and age up to 3. This is the really big age, 0 months, 0 years. Here we've got months up to 1 year, and then we go up to about 2. And so here we're looking at this is childhood, here's the neonate, here's the infancy, here's toddlerhood, which I mentioned was incorporated in that 0 to 2 age. The 3s and 4s, 5s is where we're in preschool play age. This is where they're really engaging and socializing with other kids around their same age. They're starting to go into school here. Here's the pre-adolescence, the tween years, those tweens. And here's puberty of girls and boys. Second, this is middle school and adolescence, and that takes you up to about here and then out of adulthood. So it's spectrums, ongoing spectrums. Okay, here's another theory. Sensitive theory. So this theory is talking about, and I have to laugh when I read it. Every time I look at this, it makes me laugh, because you could say that the sensitive period for girls is somewhere between 11 and about 16. Yeah, that's kind of that, but not exactly. We're talking about development still. So visual development, sensory development, motor development, cognitive development, they all kind of have their sort of a critical moment or a sensitive period, a place where it would be the best time for you to learn something. This is not nailed down to a day, an age, a month. It's not set in stone. It's individual. But the idea is that if you miss one of these sensitive periods, you may take longer to learn how to do something. So remember that I'm talking about a comprehensive approach to this: sensory, cognitive, and motor. So if you missed out on the part where you understood and could organize your eyes for binocular vision, so that when I look at a point right here, my eyes converge on that point, not out there somewhere. And it's something we learn. It's why babies play with things in front of their faces. So if you miss that, it may take you years to understand what is wrong with your vision and why you don't read well or write well. So there's a time frame in which we typically incorporate that. So that's an example of missing a sensitive period. So it doesn't mean that you can't develop what you missed, but the bigger the event should have been, like developing binocular vision, which may not be noticed for many years that you missed that point, then you may have bigger problems out the other side of it, or other problems. Personal story. When my daughter was little bitty, I had her in, pajamas. Well, the little bitty pajamas all the time with a big zipper, and, she was learning to roll over, and when she was learning, but she never creaked. She never creaked. I mean, she'd get on her belly and she'd pump her knees up. But of course,